Hey everyone! Today we are taking a look at political ideologies and beliefs. So we're really taking a look deep down into how do people form political opinions, and this may be a good chance for you to also think about why do I have the political opinions that I do? What has potentially influenced me to come up with these beliefs that I have. So taking a deep look at ourselves a little bit more than usual today, but bear with me. So, when we take a look at political beliefs, political ideologies, we want to think first about core values. Now, this is a term that we hear a lot, especially in like middle school as we're determining how do we want to live our life, how do we want to live day to day with each other. So, core values are the ideas of the individual that guide day to day choices. So here on the right side of the screen, we have a chart that shows different core values. So we have loyalty, passion, honesty, efficiency, reliability, dependability, optimism, positivity, and commitment. Now there are a wide variety of other core values that are out there guiding people's decisions, but these are usually the ones that people say like, "Oh, I'm really passionate. I want to make sure that I'm honest with my friends. And if nothing else in life, I want to be loyal." Like these are the core things that are going to drive you and your morals. So when we think about core values, we think about it on an individual base where it's like, how are you acting? Why have you chosen the path that you have? And then we also think about it in terms of a world value or a community value. And this is where we see the term political culture. So, political culture is the widely shared beliefs. Everyone is sharing these core values, and it sets up the norms on how we as citizens are going to act with each other or what we expect out of our government to help with us. So, core values can be the basis, maybe, of what political party you want to align with, or the intensity of government involvement or your involvement with society. That's where we really see liberal, conservative come into view. Liberal and conservative are not so much party ideology, it's more about how strict along party lines you're going to be or how much involvement you want the government to have based on that party ideology. So that's where we really see those core values come into play is once you have those core values established, then you are going to find it easier to align with a political party or know how you're going to vote as a citizen because you have your expectations of yourself and of your government. So, this idea of political socialization, that's where we're starting to form those core values. And that's the things in our life that are going to influence us as individuals. So, based on our influences in our day to day life, from the very beginning of life all the way up until, into your late 50s, even 60s, you are able to change your core values. And your values in life, what you really put emphasis on, that's going to guide how you vote as a citizen, how you get involved in your community on a government basis. Okay, so that's what we're really taking a look at is what's going to be that influence in your life. Now, we look at these influences really in four major categories, and that is going to be family, your school life, the social groups that you are involved in, and the political conditions as you're coming of age. Okay, so how you are interacting in those groups, the core values and ideas of the groups and the people that you're around are going to influence how you then make decisions. Because we're humans, we bounce ideas off of each other, we want to be liked by other people, and talking and having these conversations, that's going to shape our core values. That's going to shape whether we want to stronger be influenced or maybe we end up rejecting the people that we are around. Either way, it's definitely having an impact on those core values that, again, guide our day-to-day way of life. So let's break down these four things. What does this influence typically look like for these four categories? So let's start with family. Most of the time, kids want to be like their parents or not like their parents. Now, this is a little bit of a confusing statement, right? Now, if you have a good relationship with your parents, you're more likely to align politically with your parents. So you get along with them, you respect your parents, you look up to those parents, you're most likely going to have the same ideas. And like I said, be like them later in life. If you have a not great relationship with your parents, um, you don't respect them, you don't agree with their opinions, you may swing the exact opposite way of them politically because you don't want to be like them. You don't want to follow in their footsteps. So, based on your relationship with your parents, that's going to greatly impact how you end up thinking politically. So, most children are adopting their parents' ideology. Most time conservative parents are going to have conservative children. Most times liberal parents are going to have liberal children. Okay? And most of that learning is happening at dinner table conversations, at family get-togethers, at Christmas, Thanksgiving, just that day to day, how are we talking about the world around us? When we come home at the end of the day, what are we talking about? When we are, looking at the news or we're watching a TV show, how do we view those as a family? How do we view the events on the media as a family? And how your parents talk about them can impact how then you then form an opinion about a topic. Now, here's an interesting thought. What happens if you have a split household? Say dad is more along the lines of Democrat, mom is more along the lines of Republican. What happens then? And it's kind of a case by case basis in that scenario. It may be whoever you are closest with, whichever parent you're closest with, or you could be like me and fall directly in between both. Growing up, I had a very, very close relationship with my dad. Not to say my mom and I didn't get along, but my dad and I were two peas in a pod. And so, up until high school, college, I was very much along the lines of my father's ideas politically. More recently, so I'm more in between my two parents, but because of that parent relationship, who I was close with, that was going to guide my thoughts politically. Obviously, now I've become an adult of my own. I'm forming my own opinions. I have different conversations. So my political ideologies are going to be a little bit different than my parents, but definitely in high school, you could look at those dinner table conversations and see a direct impact on what my opinions were politically. Next, let's take a look at social groups. So, the friends that you're hanging out with, the sports teams that you're around, all of those things are going to greatly impact, again, the conversations that you're having, and then guiding those core values, your morals, into later your political opinions. Now, when we look at social groups, we typically are looking at your characteristics. Okay? And while I'm not a huge fan of grouping people into different categories like this, most of the time, based on your characteristics, it's predictable about which morals or which political party you may align with. So a lot of times we look at race, gender, religion, and your ethnicity. Now again, there are great outliers and there's a history. So when we look at the characteristics and typically how they're going to vote, typically people of color, Black Americans, they're going to vote Democratically. Women, more Democratic, but they're typically going to be voting more moderate. And your religion, most of the time Catholics, they are voting conservative, Republican. And then ethnicity, minority groups may be more Democratic leaning, again, because of the social programs that may have helped them throughout the generations, things like that. And so, based on the history of a social group or the characteristics, that's going to lead characteristics or those people down the road to continue voting in a certain way. So like I said, certain groups are going to tend to fall into predictable camps of either voting more liberal or more conservative. Now, what can vary is that economic self-interest. Okay, so even if you fit into one of these categories in a certain predictable camp, how you use money, how you want to see the government use money, that can shift back and forth among the groups. So that can cause a little bit of outliers in which groups are voting for which political party. Next, let's take a look at education. The schools that you are growing up in, the teachers that you have around you, and even the state that you grow up in can impact the way that you build those morals, build those core values, and how conversations are talked about, the tone that they're talked about in, the way a topic is framed. All can have an impact in the way that you form your political opinions. So, in case you didn't know, all schools require some form of U.S. history and government classes. So a lot of your political ideas are going to be formed by what you've learned about U.S. history and the way that you are taught about government. In schools, and again, this is something that maybe you don't realize unless you have a parent that is a teacher or you yourself are interested in becoming a teacher down the road, but what we teach in schools is actually influenced by the state. So I don't get to just make up whatever I want to teach about. I'm guided by approved standards that have gone through a huge process of debate, curriculum council, things like that. Okay, these are called, at least in Michigan, high school content expectations. Now, in Michigan, about 3 or 4 years ago, our social studies standards actually got revamped, where around the entire state they came out with a draft of new standards because standards hadn't been updated in 10, 15 years. Obviously, history has changed or more has been added to history. So we need to update our standards. We need to update what is taught every year. The state of Michigan held different listening sessions around the state. So they went to Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, Lansing to hear from teachers about what they wanted to teach about, what is important to have in schools. Now, when they did a first listening session, they drafted up standards that did not include a lot of topics around women's history, LGBTQ, NAACP, and so there were concerns about minorities being erased from standards. The state of Michigan took that information, heard those concerns, and went back and was able to rewrite some of the important standards to include more minority history. So, because of that, now I include more of those topics in my classes, again, because the state is telling me to. We also have to look at what kind of language is in our textbooks. Is our textbook using, we are celebrating the win of a war rather than a war came to an end, right? Just that slight change of language could impact how you think or frame a certain war or how you think about U.S. involvement in a war, things like that. Okay, so then really on that micro level, how does a teacher frame a content? Are they spending more time on a certain topic and it maybe influences you to think a certain way about a topic? Are they stopping student conversation at a certain point? And does that lead you to not being able to have certain conversations about political matters? And it may just be the teacher's comfort level, or it could lead to a little bit of how do they view issues. Okay, and so then again, how is the issue being framed? What is the supporting documents behind an issue? And then is that then framing maybe how you end up thinking about a topic? Okay, so schools have a great influence over how you are thinking about political topics, how you're shaping your morals, things like that. Lastly, we're looking at, again, that fourth really big factor in how you shape your political opinions, and it's the conditions that you grow up in. What is happening in the world as you are starting to really be critical of the government, starting to think about what role politics has in your life? So what's happening during your life, and then how is that shaping your opinion? Typically, we're going to see wars, economic moments, school changes. Those big political moments are going to impact how you think about politics yourself. So, for example, we are thinking about, if you are someone who grew up during the Vietnam War, you may have a mistrust in war. You may have a mistrust in government involvement, which typically is going to fall along the lines of being more conservative or more Republican Party ideology. And again, because there was a war while you were coming of age, and did you agree with the war? Did you not? And so being involved in a war is going to shape how you think about politics. For myself, I'm in this weird generational zone where I'm like at the tail end of being a millennial. So I started to think about politics really when 9/11 happened. And I remember a time before 9/11, and then I was raised primarily after 9/11. So because of that, I saw a shift in society where we really glamorized being patriotic. We supported Americans. It was yes, America, all this, and it was very in your face, especially after 9/11. And so a lot of my generation is that way, and a lot of my generation is like America comes first. We focus on us first. We're not going to, or we don't want to provide aid to other countries because we're America first. And that's a very common trait to see in my age group. And it's also common to see my age group have distrust in government programs because we saw the recession of 2008 when taxes went up and we saw mortgages crash and interest rates fluctuate so much to where people were losing their jobs, people were losing their homes. Now, my family was impacted by the recession. Our house was impacted. And so the way that I think about money and the way that I spend my money and have the government involved with my money definitely is impacted. And again, it goes back to what happened during my life, what happened as I was starting to form my political opinions. Now, you guys may not feel like you've had that moment yet. And most of the time, you may not even realize that you're living in that moment until years down the road, and you can look back and go, yep, that shaped my political opinion. And don't be surprised if COVID-19 is the thing that ends up shaping your political opinions. Would not be surprised in the slightest. So it creates this cycle of impact. Now, what your parents and grandparents experienced, that may impact you too. So my parents grew up in the 80s when we're really having a favorable Republican president. Reagan is in charge, yet at the same time, we kind of are still impacted by Nixon when people had a distrust in government. And so, how my parents again talked about politics at the dinner table may have impacted how I think about politics. Even though I wasn't alive there to experience the 80s, I'm still hearing that opinion, and those morals are shaping then how I think about life. So, just some really good things to think about. I really want you to consider over the next few days, how is politics shaping my life? Who am I hanging out with? How do we talk about politics? And am I influenced by what I'm looking at? What social media I have in front of me? How my parents are talking about politics? It's all really interesting, and it really starts to get into the idea of psychology and, again, those moral codes that you build up throughout your life. If you guys have any questions, please reach out. I am more than happy to talk.